record on this. Well, welcome to the Pure Light Project podcast. My name is Andrea Mai, and today I have a new friend on who I recently met in Orlando. We connected at Podfest Expo, and it was a new experience for me. I don't remember if you've been there before, Kara, but Kara Goodwin with Meditation Conversation. And so I was just looking for people on this little app that the conference gave us, for everybody to connect. And I was looking for people who did meditation and healing work. And I connected with Kara through that. And we had the best conversations. And it was really incredible. So I'm really happy that you're here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm so excited to be here. It was such a blessing to connect with you. I really appreciated you reaching out before the podcast. And then it was like the first thing that I did when I got there was to meet you. And it was like, okay, good. Because I didn't know if I was going to find my people, I mean, not that it's like, oh, everybody's got to be like me, but you kind of like, I went completely alone. I knew nobody.
Yeah.
I mean, one person, Katie Kremitzos, I interviewed her on the podcast. So I had connected with her, but she was very busy. And anyway, I was like, oh, yes, my people are here.
Yeah. There were not very many of us,
No.
I was maybe a handful that specifically, filled out that part of their profile. And so I was like, oh, and then it turned out to be you, and it was great.
Yes, that's,
Right.
I know. I was like, maybe I was just supposed to meet Andrea. I got a lot of great ideas and contacts through it, but that was a big part of it for me. So thank you.
Yeah. It was really cool to come together. I mean, you've been podcasting a long time, and I was actually like, whoa, like she's been at this a minute. And normally I haven't really had other people on here who have a podcast. So we can talk about that a little, about what that's like to bring your heart and your message, shine your light through your voice. And I would love to explore that a little bit, and what that's meant for you. But first, let's get into just who you are, right? Who you're up in Indiana, right?
Yeah.
Not exactly meditation mecca of the United States, by most people's, but that's where it happens, right? The heartlands, a lot of
Right.
us are in these places. Tennessee, probably people don't put the two together
Yeah.
either, so
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about you, whatever you'd like to share, and kind of how you came into, where meditation and these practices, these spiritual practices, sort of started to shift your life, if you want.
It's so interesting that you say that about the heartland. That's really insightful because I have a friend who has moved to Indiana from California, and she kind of grew up in a spiritual, sort of more, much more spiritual than religious, but like a spiritual community in like the Berkeley area. So like, just a totally different vibe than Indiana. And she is a deeply spiritual person. And she's like, there is something about being in the Midwest. It's such a heart-centered place, and it's so grounding. Yeah. And she's like, and that's something that is missing, that had been missing from her experience, was it was a very like etheric, like, very focused on spirit, but not really grounded. And she's like, I meet so many really, really beautiful people who are not spiritual at all, but they just have these huge hearts because it's just in them, like it's part of the culture. And I really appreciated her kind of shining the light in that way, because it can be easy to be like, oh, I'm in the Midwest, And I wish I was in a spiritual community or whatever we can tell ourselves about
Yeah.
what might be holding us back,
Yeah.
and to hear her perception and through experience of that was really powerful and ignited
Wow.
something within me.
I love that. I love that. Now, is that the area that you were raised in, or
Y-
you've been around a few
Yeah.
places, or?
Well, I was raised in Indiana, a little ways away from where I live now, but I have, and then I went to college. I went to IU, go Hoosiers, and but my husband's English, and I lived in England for several years in my 20s. And then I have two kids. We moved from England back to America, back to Indiana, and that's when we started a family. Um, and then in 2014, we moved to Italy. So
Okay.
we were in Italy with the kids for 4 years and then moved back. So if I'm going to live in America, I'm going to be in Indiana. Historically, this is how it's been for me.
Yeah.
But I do have this strong European connection as well. And as far as like my journey with meditation, I come from a really mainstream background. So I, like I said, I went to like a state university,
Yeah.
like regular public school. And I went into corporate America from school, did IT work, and had a small stint in sales, worked
Okay.
for like really blue chip companies. And it was when we moved to Italy that I stopped working, which was really a huge blessing because it was like the golden handcuffs, where it was like way too much.
Yeah.
My husband and I both had like two careers that were on the fast track, and we had these little kids, and I was getting pulled in all these directions, and I really felt like I wasn't doing anything well. I was doing a
Right.
gazillion things, but all of them, I felt like I was doing a quarter of the job that I should be doing,
Yeah.
that swear word should. Um, but I really was like, but I can't just give it up. Like it was so rewarding in many ways, in the mainstream, I was paid really well, but also just, I felt really supported by my company. I worked for IBM at the time, and, they wanted women, they wanted mothers, they wanted to like have a diverse workforce. And so they were really supporting my career and trying to make things work, so they were really kind of doing as much as they could to
Right.
make it feasible for me, and to make it a place where I wanted to work. And so it was really hard to then like recognize that and feel like, wow, they're really kind of doing everything they can. I'm just going to walk away. I still want more, you know? So,
That moment in time when, when but you're like all the little voices chiming in, you
yeah,
know, am I crazy? What am I gonna do? How's this gonna work? It
yes,
doesn't always happen, but most people have at least a little bit of that. So
yeah.
you were sitting there, at this moment in time and space when it was decision time, and then what? How did it go?
Well, I sat with that decision for a long time where I was like, this is really too much. It's really too much because my husband had accepted this European role at the same time that I got the big leap in my career. But he was having to travel to Europe a lot. They were going to move us.
Hmm.
But then there were a whole bunch of understandable circumstances as to why they didn't. So there were about like 15 months where he had this European role. And so he was in Europe a lot. And then that meant that I was home with two little kids. Like my daughter was 4 when we moved, and we didn't
Okay.
move for another 15 months after this whole thing started.
Right.
Um, and my son is about 3 years older than her. So
Yeah.
anytime anything went wrong with the house, went wrong with the kids, we had 2 dogs and a cat, we had, just life. And I had to be on site at my client's site, but I had, because I was in sales, like my schedule was more fluid than my husband. So even if he was home, if the daycare was going to call somebody, it was going to be me. And I was going
Yeah.
to have to go and figure out why, oh, my daughter's shoes are wet. Where is her other pair of shoes? Oh, we don't have another pair of shoes. Mom, you've got to come and bring,
Yeah.
you've got to come and get your daughter's feet warm type of thing. I was like, I just got downtown. Are you serious?
Yeah.
And so those types of things all the time. And so I got to my breaking point over and over again.
Yeah.
And then kind of pulled myself back off the ledge where it was like, no, I can't just, it's a big, big decision to walk away from this. And so
Did you
eventually,
did
sorry.
you like, knowing that you wanted to leave and that you were ready to leave, did you create a off ramp from it, or did you just just make the jump?
Well, what happened is that the overseas opportunity is solidified.
Okay.
And it was like, okay, we are actually moving you. And it was like, okay, here we go. Now there's like a logical reason where like my back's kind of against the wall. Now, again, with my company being so like, they were really keen to like keep empowering women. And so, there was talk about like, oh, apply to IBM Italy. And then you can transfer over to the Italian division. And it was like, okay, I am going over there. Like I have no network. I have no family. I have little kids.
Yeah.
And we have no net. Like if I'm not taking care, like I knew my husband was going to be traveling a ton. It's like if I'm not there for them, and I can't imagine that like a brand new company, they have this new employee and it's like, oh yeah, sure. If you need to leave at 3 to go pick your kids up from school, no problem. I'm like, no, I live in the real world. I have a feeling like, let me just imagine for 5 seconds how this is going to turn out. And no. So it was like,
what year was that?
This was 2014.
Okay. Yeah.
So gosh, almost 10 years now.
Wow.
My goodness, that's crazy.
Wow.
So it allowed me to have a clean break and kind of like allowed the decision to be made for me, more or less. Of course, they didn't send us there without our will. We were like, oh, we can live in Italy. Okay. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
But
not the military,
Right. Yeah. So we moved there. And at this point, I didn't have a meditation practice. I was always very curious about meditation and like kind of a seeker, but in the background, because at this time, my life was very conventional, very mainstream. There were not people in my life who were like really exploring meditation. I had tried meditation a little bit and just, I thought it was supposed to be easy where you sit down, you stop thinking. I was like, oh, sure, I'll do that. And it wasn't easy. And so I got like, this far into it and then was like, well, I'm terrible at this. And, gave it up.
Yes, bring in the judgments, bring in
Oh yeah.
good meditation, bad meditation. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It was like, I do not have the right mind for this. Right.
Yeah. It should be calm before I need it. You should only come to meditate. There was this quote one time, way back in the day. I think it was Ellen DeGeneres said something about what is the herb? There's an herb that you take to help memory. Starts with a G. I
know what you're talking about.
It's not ginseng.
Ginseng?
Anyway,
No.
I don't think it was ginseng, but basically it was like, if you can remember to take it, you probably don't need it. And if you can't remember to take it, you probably need it. It's like, if you think you need meditation, but just the fallacies around meditation and that your mind has to actually be still, that comes way over time for most people.
Exactly.
And So yeah, but so you obviously you kept with it.
Well, I tried it and then like told myself I was no good at it. And so I didn't really pursue it until while we were living in Italy. Things like kind of very quickly started unhinging. Within from May to November, I had the death of my sister-in-law. In order, the death of then was quickly followed by the death of our dog. My stepdad had an issue with his brainstem that needed like this really delicate surgery. My mother-in-law got hit by a motorbike while she crossed the street.
Mm.
Um, and then by Thanksgiving of that year, my stepmom was in the ICU with a failing heart and
Right.
had a heart transplant the day after Thanksgiving. So all of this happening while we were living in Italy, not able to really be with anybody very easily.
Right.
We relied on a lot of support of our friends there to help us with the kids so that we could help our families. And um, it really got to the point where my reality just was spinning, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what to expect next.
Right.
I recognized that I didn't want to answer my phone because anytime bad news came, people called.
Right.
Otherwise it was text messages, but I knew if my phone rang and it was the middle of the week, because I talked to my family on Sundays, it's like
Yeah.
that's when we'd always call. And
Yeah.
I'm like,
Oh,
oh,
I know. I
somebody's
think if the
calling
phone
me.
rings after 9 p.m. or even 8 p.m. these days, right? It must be bad news, But
Right.
and I'm not wired towards a, a worry or a panic. It's just a thought, right? It's an old program of
Yes.
that's the only time that the phone rings. So who
Right.
who and
What's
what,
wrong?
right?
Yep.
So that's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
So it was through that I then was like, okay, I need to start living life at a different level, different octave. I was kind of
Yeah.
really enjoying living in Italy, being with my new friends that I'd made there, having, like a cappuccino after I dropped the kids off at school, and um I really, really loved it. It was such a beautiful place, and I was really enjoying myself, and that was really kind of a kick for me of like, okay, you had your fun,
Yeah.
now it's time to like really go deeper. And so I kind of came to meditation really more as a survival mechanism to begin with, and had a very um what's the word I want to say? Like, it wasn't a spiritual practice for me to start with, even though I learned meditation through the methods of Paramahansa Yogananda. So
Yeah.
he was a very spiritual person and talked a lot about God. But for me, it was really more of like I love the science behind it and like how we can
Mm.
kind of tune into consciousness. But there was like a threshold I didn't want to go over, which was
Okay.
this real acceptance of a divine intelligence. It was like I was okay, like going and exploring my own consciousness and like the super consciousness, subconscious. Um, but that like cosmic intelligence, divine intelligence, a
Right.
God figure, um, that took me a lot longer. That was another kind of evolution of my practice.
Yeah.
Now I'm all about that. It's very much like, wow, there is this divine orchestration, there is this divine intelligence, there is the cosmic intelligence, and we are a part of it. And it's amazing how we can tap into it
Right.
and the very real visceral experiences that we can have. Um, but
Yeah,
that
it's
really had to have time to bake within me.
and that's interesting too, because when you tie it back to you know, places in the heartlands, most of I don't know the rest of the world all that well, but in uh I grew up in northern Minnesota. I live in Tennessee. The notion of God, which I don't really think I've discussed this with other people on the show, but you know, the humans personify that, like, and religion evolves out of that, and each person has their own. I'm still like, I was deeply involved. I spent 5 years in a theology program. I spent about 8 years in and out of churches, up to my eyeballs, because I don't do anything halfway, right?
Yeah.
If I was gonna do this, because that's part of, it's part of my experience. But and the notion of God, like how they tried to frame God, put God into a box, this notion. And so the word became very a, a place of pain for me, even though I have the deepest heart connection to the innate intelligence, to the vastness, to the void, to the what is, right? The all in all is what I often call it. Like, it's great spirit, runs through, in and everything. I'm it, you're it, this microphone's it, right? But there's something when you come through some of these circles where that word becomes it's triggering sometimes, activating sometimes. And so I'm only kind of riffing on this because I think it's important to acknowledge that we each come to whatever that is in whatever language, and there's so many ways to describe it. And I noticed myself as you were saying it, like there's still this tiny little niggling trigger around that word. And
Mm,
so anyways, there it is. But I
yeah.
want to keep going. I want to keep exploring and hearing for you how that unfolded.
Yeah. Well, and I'm with you 100%. I think that's where my resistance came from because having grown up around, it's like I'm not unfamiliar with churches. I didn't grow up like really deeply rooted in church in the Christian sense, for example, but you know, I've spent a fair amount of Sundays in Christian churches and that's the culture I grew up in. I mean, that was like if you were religious, you were Christian. And I parted ways with a lot of that thinking and saw a lot of control and manipulation and a lot of things that didn't add up. It was like, it's so much of the teachings were about like loving acceptance and tolerance but then the way that people were using it was controlling and it was justifying hate and it was like one path which is
Yeah.
the other thing is like God's mine and the way that I view God is the way, the right way, and
Yeah.
everything else is false and we have to be afraid of it, and even our God we need to be afraid of
Yeah.
um all of that stuff. I still carry some wounding from that too. And so then that's why it was so difficult for me to kind of open myself up and pass through that threshold where I could um, embody that more. I know when I was still living in Italy, I went on my first spiritual retreat. It was just a weekend away in Assisi, and there was a healer there. And I'd never been to a healer before, but I'd been very curious about it.
Yeah.
And she actually approached me. She was teaching the workshop that I was a part of. And she came up behind me while I was eating and put her hands on my shoulders. And she was like, I am called to tell you that I am a healer and I offer sessions if you're interested while you're here, but there's no pressure. It's not included in your package, so it's extra. But I just needed to tell you that. And I was like, oh, I love that. But I'm not sick. Like, can you still heal me if I don't necessarily like have an injury or an illness or something?
Right.
And she was
Right.
like, yes, I mean, this is like how little I knew. I was like, I don't know. Like, yeah, sure, but I think I'm healed. you know?
Nothing broken.
Right. Should I go break my arm real quick so that I can get
Except
my
my
healing?
heart and my mental state and my emotional state. And
Well, exactly. She's like, it heals on all the levels. And So I had that healing session with her. And what's interesting is that this was part of that Yogananda tradition, that this is where I had learned my meditation techniques. This was like my foundational, like I was very, by this point, I was very familiar with Paramhansa Yogananda's lineage, with his teachings, with his methods. And this was a community that was built on his teachings.
Right.
And in this workshop that I mentioned that she was running, I was the only student who who had a background in any of this. So she was going
Oh,
into like, what's the lineage? Like, who are the previous gurus? Like, how did Yogananda come through the ranks? And, how do we meditate, and how do, all these things that like were, I learned that stuff like ages ago. And I had come to this with a lot more, exposure than everybody else in the class. And she knew that because of conversations that had happened,
right.
and the questions that I was asking.
Right.
Like I would ask a question, she'd have to kind of fill in some gaps for people. During this session, she got to my heart center and she said, "Why don't you pray before you meditate?" And I was like, yeah, like, why? I mean, my mind was going a million miles a minute. Like, why would she think I don't pray? I don't pray before, like that. What I did always skip the prayers because I was in this this place where I wasn't comfortable with it. I didn't really know what I believed.
Yeah.
And I was, even though I loved the methods and the approach of Yogananda, I still was like not really sure that it was the right, like I was just testing it out. But I was like, I don't know that I know enough to be able to really hand myself over right now. So I really wasn't engaging in prayer. But she had no reason to know that or think that, because I was
Right.
like the top student in this workshop. Like she said that as I was leaving. This was after the session, but she had mentioned just about like how thought-provoking my questions were, and that she, really enjoyed having me there and so forth. And there really was like, on the surface, she should have assumed that I tick all the boxes when it comes to their methodology and how they've taught everybody to meditate, which starts with prayer. And she was picking up on, your heart is closed, for lack of a better word, or it's not like the energy isn't moving in your heart the way that it could be.
Yeah.
And there's a surrender piece to it. And prayer is going to be a key for you. And it's not that I like left that session, I was like, yep, from now on, prayer it is. Like, it still was like this whole process of just figuring out who I am and what resonates and what
So
is true for me.
what in your mind or your heart at that time how did you connect to what prayer was, maybe versus what you've discovered it to be?
That's
Like,
such a great question. So the prayer, because I was studying these meditation techniques, there was like this prescribed prayer that started with, it was like their lineage of gurus down the line. So there were like
sure.
5 people, avatars
Yeah.
that you invoked.
Yeah.
And for me, again, it was really just like, I was not sure about that. And so and I did adopt that approach for a while because I was part of that organization for a while. But how it's evolved over time is a much more integrated, like heart-based, like it's coming from inside me rather than these words that I have to remember, like, oh, okay, somebody told me that this, ascended master is like these 5 ascended masters are the ones that I need to invoke. It's
Yeah.
really been more of like taking pieces of my journey and then like, okay, I feel a true resonance, or I have had a true experience with this particular ascended
Yeah.
master or angelic being, or even star family, like I feel a
Sure.
connection with, like a star family kind of galactic energy or something of
Yeah.
the sort. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I know the lineage that I spent a lot of years in, the Shambhala. It's a Tibetan brought to the West tradition, and I left that about 5 years ago. But we would start off with these chants, basically, and the encouragement was always, if this is comfortable for you, right? It was really the calling in and expressing gratitude for those who had uh devoted to themselves to waking up, right? To awaken to nature. It was super uncomfortable for many people. There were periods when it was really like, I don't get it. But then there was times when it was really precious to me. Just like,
mm,
I haven't been in a church in years, but still the old hymns, right? There's certain lines where they bring me to tears. I weep, because they crack open a piece of me, and all I can ever estimate is that whatever that is for me, it's like my heart connecting to the true heart of the person who first spoke those words. That's what it always feels like
mm,
for me, when it was true devotion before it got distorted. And I say
yeah.
devotion, like devotion to, oh, for me, everything is to awaken nature, right? To the the divine intelligence that runs through all things, and that we are part of it. It's
Mm-hmm.
such a beautiful expression. But prayer, like, I love synchronicities, right? Like, this
Oh,
is a thing that's been on my heart for a while, because there's a part of me that feels, oh, it's extraordinary. The there's a recognition that there's a piece of me that sounds like what you were just talking about. Maybe it's not quite shut off, but it's almost, I've quite honestly have spent a lot of time in the beyond, in the void. Um, and then it's a hard thing to explain or express unless you've had that experience. There's no right, there's no wrong. If you haven't experienced that, I had a hard time touching my feet on planet Earth. It was very painful. And so to learn how to bring that in and embody that, and then now we get to like bring the whole thing together in this
mm,
beautiful, right? The the beautiful place we are now in this world, and what we get to explore together. Um, that I'm curious how as you talk about sort of ascended masters you've connected with, different persons in different lineages, and even in the galactic. Um, I haven't I've had experiences, but I haven't necessarily very specifically connected directly with, even though other people say, "Oh, I think you are connected to this galactic family. I'm
mhm.
connected to this, and you feel very familiar to me," right? So I've had that. But can we explore that a little more? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, on the galactic side, you mean
Yeah, like
specifically?
like
Yeah, that's a great point. So some of the connection has come from external suggestions that then resonate with me, and then it is synchronicity.
Mhm,
Where, like, for instance, Andromeda came up. I had an oracle reading in Sedona,
mhm,
and Andromeda was one of the things that came up, and I didn't really even know what that meant. Um, and it was one of those, like, very quickly after that, like, several things came up about, like, from different sources, of not necessarily saying like, oh my gosh, you're Andromedan, but just where it was like, wow, Andromeda is everywhere now. Like,
yeah,
where
yeah,
it's just funny. But and like you, I haven't had a ton of experiences where, like, I see form. You talk about, like, the void, that you've had a lot of experiences in the void. um as you know, I have a lot of, like, multidimensional experiences where I'm seeing things as like geometries, shapes, like complex shapes, fractal shapes that look kind of like mandalas, but they've got depth, they've got, intelligence, they're moving.
Yeah.
I see space a lot. If I'm having a multidimensional experience, I see just like space and like fast moving stars. And I see lights and colors that I don't see here, like that are outside of our visible spectrum. So, but form, like form in terms of like beings, I don't typically see, but I have had a few experiences. One was seeing myself as, and now I can't remember. I think this could have been a lucid dream. I think it
Okay.
was a lucid dream rather than like a multi-dimensional experience where I'm fully awake. But it was one of those like lucid dreams where I was like, I think I was asleep, but it was a very strong dream that felt like
Yeah.
there was more going on. But I believe that this particular one was like, I woke up and then remembered like, oh my God, I saw myself as this like blue being with no hair and kind of a smaller head that sort of came down like
Yeah.
kind of angular, and then like very very skinny arms. Like I remember I could look down and I was like, gosh, my arms are almost not even there, they were so skinny. And then I had some sort of head band like around my forehead. um and that was very interesting because I didn't have a lot of experience with that sort of a dream before, or that sort of like a presence. Um, and I know one time also I was like, I was drifting off to sleep, and it wasn't a full blown metaphysical experience where I was like seeing
Right.
colors or anything, but I did see just three faces that were not earthly,
Sure.
not human. And it was just like one came in and then another like came in and then another one. And I was like, whoa, those are aliens. Like, where did that come from? And it was just, that was it. Like, then it was
Yeah.
over. And I just kind of thought it was cool. But I was like, I have no idea like what even species it was or anything.
Yeah.
But I was like, whoa, like it just happened. And there was another time that I was falling asleep, and I heard this like, I can't even make the noise, but this like clicking sound
Okay.
in my ear. I heard like, it
Okay.
was like this type of
Mantis type?
clicking, like a mantis, but I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
I just distinctly, I mean, I would not have been, I opened my eyes because I was like, is somebody doing something in my ear? I would not, I was almost more surprised there wasn't anything there because
Yeah.
it was such a visceral experience, audible experience.
Yeah.
Um, I then later, that was one of those where like the mantis came up a lot in a very short time,
Mhm.
where I didn't know anything about mantis
Yeah.
beings. And that was like my strongest um, experience, like on the physical plane with the
Yeah.
mantis. But it was one of those, like, once that dropped in, I was getting a lot of like external, either like people bringing up mantis beings where I'm
Sure.
like, or different, like I think I've had like a reading where, oh no, I know what it was. I had a podcast guest on, and we were there to talk about her, like she had an NDE, and Sharon Coleman
Okay.
was her name, and she's an intuitive. And we get off the recording and she's like, I just have to tell you, I don't normally do this, but it's so strong. You have these giant
Yeah.
insects really, really close to you. They're huge and they're like right there. And I think she said there were three of them. And unfortunately, I'd stopped recording because I would love to like be
Yeah.
able to re-listen to what she said. But it was right in this time where, and we didn't talk about galactics at all. I didn't know
Yeah.
that she didn't even know. She's like, I've only seen this one other time and it was in Hawaii and I didn't know what was happening. And so she like hardly even knew what it was. I don't even
Yeah.
think she said mantis. She was like, they're bugs, they're big insects.
Yeah.
Um, so
So
there have been
so
things like that.
yeah, and I think this is a really so I notice see I'm in this position right now, right, where I'm kind of straddling different worlds. I bridge a lot of worlds, right? On Earth, let's say a
Yeah.
lot of communities.
Uh-huh.
And some communities wouldn't have a flipping clue what we just were talking about, right?
Mhm.
And some do, but they like, I'm in X position and no way, Jose, am I talking about it? And some people are like full on, like, they're bringing in like all the galactic stuff and, whatever maybe industry they're in, or maybe that's their full-time role. And I think that the more we can start to share that these are just experiences, each one, it's going to be unique to each of us. Um, some people are going to think it's way too far out there, and that's just fine,
Mhm.
right? Sometimes we might have thought that at one point in our own lives, right? We're like, no
Mhm.
way, man. you
Yes.
know, I mean, and you can make it for some people, it's a very big priority to go further with that. For some people, it's just a fascinating thing that you experience that one time. Many people have, like, I think in our society, it's fairly common to have experiences with ghosts or spirits, right? But now we're bringing in galactics and alien and ET, and that's a whole other level. And you can choose to meet it any way you want. You can be like, if it makes you uncomfortable, lean in and wonder why, ask yourself why, or just don't worry about it in this moment. I, it's becoming harder and harder to, I don't know, maybe it's just the circles I run in, but, there's a lot of people who are having these experiences and they maybe don't have anybody who really gets it. Um, you know, I I've had experiences, I've done some like regression work, uh alternate lifetime sort of regression work for myself, and I've seen myself in different forms, you know. It
Mhm.
hasn't presented itself to be a thing I need to go any deeper with other than I saw it. So
Mhm.
maybe that opens me up to conversations that might have wigged me out a few years ago, right?
Yeah.
I don't I actually me, I doubt they ever would have really wigged me out. Like I'm
Yeah.
pretty open and always have been, but you know, it's the more of us that can share. I had this one experience, or somebody, that woman may she's probably felt just as bizarre to tell you that what she was seeing around you if she had not had that experience before. So many of us, that's what this multidimensionality is bringing in, and more people, like, we've gone through waves and waves and waves of awakening, and the reality is, here we are on planet Earth. Okay, we're in human form. We have businesses and jobs and families and communities and cars and pets and whatever, right? We have these lives, and all of these things are coming in, and these new experiences. I said at the fest, at Podfest, I was like, if you don't know what New Earth and ascension and expansion and these sorts of things mean, that's okay. Like, I've got you. We're still okay. You don't have to ever understand it in those terms. We can talk in a whole lot of ways about how your life is shifting,
Mm.
and right, how these same tools, like the work we do in meditation, that's why meditation has always been so ex- so key for me, and like whatever it is to wake us up, because these keys transcend any form in any realm to bring you closer to the experience of true reality, right? And to like express, to consciously choose your life, uh, and your experience. So I used to laugh and say it didn't matter if you were from Pittsburgh or the Pleiades, right? Like these tools still apply somehow, you
Yes.
know. But
Right.
I mean, how have you, like, you've had these experiences now? How is that shifting, like from when you first really, okay, so you've got this podcast, which by the way, folks, she has like over 200 episodes on this podcast, so she's been doing it far more effectively and consistently than than I have, you know. Um
For a longer time.
yeah, and like how has that progression been for you from who you started, who Kara was in the beginning, episodes 1 through 20, right?
Mhm.
And then like all the things when you had those moments of maybe discomfort about sharing something for the first time.
Yeah.
Can you talk
Yeah,
about that?
it's really interesting. I mean, I think it applies to the podcast and it applies to me working with people, because it's like I've been teaching meditation since 2018. So I kind of started with a much more grounded approach and, very like trying to keep everybody happy and like not get too weird with people. And I really didn't have any sort of galactic connection consciously for a while. Like that's developed more. Like the mantid stuff is like barely a year old. And other like galactic stuff prior to that. But in 2018, it was not on my radar at all. Um, but the podcast started as a very like grounded approach. I had a podcast partner for the first, I want to say, year and a half.
Mhm.
She lives in Sweden, and she eventually she had to reprioritize some things. And with our time difference and once we started having guests on, it was just really like we hardly ever had any overlapping time to really make it practical. Um, but we started it as like wanting to inspire everyday people into like, you can have a meditation practice and here's how you can do it. Here's how it can be really practical, and applicable, and wanting to keep inspiring people to keep going with it. Um, Particularly once she dropped off, then it became a totally interview style. And I started bringing in people with different areas of expertise.
Mm.
And so it was like, oh, now we're talking more about like energetic healing, or talking more about like sound and how that affects our consciousness, or, having different authors on and things like
Yeah.
that. But really expanding outward to say like, okay, I know about meditation and I know about things that come into my awareness and experiences that I've had. But then you've got all these people who are focusing on different things and diving deeply into metaphysical, meditation tangential topics
Yeah.
that I don't know about or I'm not an expert in. So like, what can they offer for a listener to like, because we all resonate with different things. So,
Yeah.
um, but I've been guarded for a long time. Like as the more I've opened up and the more like metaphysical experiences I've had, the more mystical experiences that I've had, there's always a part of me that wants to share, because I find it so helpful when people share. Um, and I know that it can be activating, like it can activate
Mhm.
energetically within people. And there's a part of me that doesn't want to be the weirdo,
Right.
who's like,
Right.
or that people, think that I'm making things up or whatever, whatever it is the things we tell ourselves of like, well, if I put myself out there, I'm going to be vulnerable in this way and I'll be rejected in this way.
Yeah.
Um, so that I still have to hold that balance, right? So my community, the people that I'm teaching, like I like to know where they are in their journey and try to give, like, I want to push them and help them expand, but I also don't want to lose them
Yeah.
in terms of like, okay, now like you can't relate to anything I'm talking about because you have no frame of reference.
Yeah.
Like I'm talking about sacred geometry and I might as well have three heads. Like
Yeah.
you don't have any frame of reference, and then that can, like, if people can stop on some level kind of trusting you or feeling
Yeah.
like you don't have the right insight for them.
Yeah.
Best case scenario, right? um
Well,
so
to each, uh the path, what it's unfolded for you was specific to you, that good, beautiful foundation of meeting your heart, meeting your mind, meeting your body, you know, that's taking you on your journey. And it's tricky. I remember back in the day, um, there was such the Buddhist community was often so, they just were so rattled that anybody could have secular meditation, right?
mm,
So there was the MBSR was big back in like 2013, 2014, kind of 2015. And people were like, this is no good if you don't have the spiritual grounding. And I was just like, no, it's a beautiful foundation. Like, let them begin wherever they begin.
right.
And like, wow, it was kind of shocking. So even in a tradition that was like
All about
spouting
meditation.
the power of it, but it still had to be in their framework, right? Still in their
Yeah.
context, or it was no good. And so that's what we get to. I mean, you're sitting here, you're coming from a totally different tradition than I am. I've come out of two different, including a deep, esoteric, like meditation practice inside of the Christian community, and years in the Tibetan and a lot of Zen and Taoist, right? All these beautiful things. We have these great tools, and you come to them however you come to them is my encouragement, and
Yeah.
go where you are to go with them as far as you want. And you might meet some weirdos along the way, right?
Yes.
Who surprise you and say things, but then you get to meet more of yourself.
Yes. Absolutely. It's all serves the purpose of expansion if we allow it to.
Yeah.
And you said that so beautifully. And I honor that in terms of, even if something that I say, if it looks like a misstep because I've lost somebody, or they're lost, like they just can't relate to it and then they don't trust me or whatever it is. I don't want to intentionally trigger somebody in that way,
Yeah.
but I also trust that, like, maybe it has activated something within them that's not quite ready to germinate, but um, there might be a seed that's planted that will serve them
Yeah.
on their journey. Like there have been so many times I have been humbled because somebody has said something to me that I thought was so outlandish, that they were crazy, they were, or that they didn't quite understand something because it was different than how I
Yeah.
understood it. And then months later, years later, whatever, I have an experience where I'm like, oh my God, they were dead on. They were dead on, but I wasn't ready. And it's so humbling. And it's happened so many times
Yeah.
that it's really like, I really try to hold, even like though experience, like it's really hard to question our experiences and the learnings that we have through direct experience. But I always try to hold things really lightly because things can always be like, I understand that I can only with this human consciousness, my perception will always be limited with where we are in consciousness. And I keep working to expand it, my understanding, my awareness, my consciousness. And the universe is infinite and vast and creative and funny and like stinging and all these things that I'm like, there's so many different ways to experience things and so many levels and layers to truth that if I were to try to think that like, oh, finally, I understand everything now, it's like
Yeah.
that is a fallacy.
Oh,
So
man. Well, we have shown once again, we know how to talk, and we could probably talk for about 10 more hours.
I know. I'm sorry for
Oh,
running over.
oh, no, there's no like hard and fast rule, but I just like to keep it around this mark. So yeah. Well, so I want to just wrap it up. Maybe just tell people again. So it's Meditation Conversation is the name of
Hmm.
your podcast. Is
Yes.
it audio only, or is it on any video platforms like YouTube or?
You can find it on YouTube. I have been putting a lot of my more recent interviews are out there. I am not as active on there. Like it's
Okay.
not always up to date. You can
Okay.
find the most current ones on the audio version. Um, but yeah, I am out there on YouTube at the meditation conversation. And I'm on
And
like the socials, Kara
yeah.
Goodwin meditation, some version of that. Instagram is, I think, Kara_Goodwin_meditation, something. Anyway, my
Yeah.
website has all those links too, just karagoodwin.com.
You're a goodwin.com. Awesome.
Yeah. And I have a lot of free resources and stuff out there too on my website. So
Beautiful. Well, I really thank you. I'm so grateful that I
yeah.
got to connect with you, that meet you, that we had so much good time together at this very busy festival, but or expo, I guess it was called, but and I can't wait to see, how it continues to evolve for you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so let's stay
Yeah.
in touch and
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. And I just reiterate what a blessing it was to connect with you at Podfest. And the space that you hold is just really, really profound. I've felt it here today. And when we were connecting over at Podfest, it was just, we didn't get into a lot of the profundity that we experienced at that time, but yeah, just thank you again
yeah.
from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you. Should we end with a bow? Let's end with a bow. Can we do
Of
that?
course. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Mm.
Mm.
Mm. Beautiful. All
Thank
right.
you so
We'll
much.
catch you soon.
Wonderful.
Bye bye.